Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1980. We're going to be taking a look at The Clash. So let's get the guys up on screen and see how they get on. And there we have it. A short performance tonight in terms of the length of the track, but I always say in most of the videos that I look at, the foundation of the rhythm section has got to be in place for a great live performance. And straight away, as soon as we start the track, we've got Topper Headon on drums, who is so solid throughout the whole performance. And it is locked in terms of the tempo. That's the reason that you can tap your foot to this and the audience are nodding along, because the groove is so set. It's just a straightforward 4/4 time signature here, but Topper and also Paul Cinnamon in the middle of the shot here on bass are so locked in. It means that everything can be placed on top of that, and as a listener, you've got a point of reference throughout the whole performance, because there's nothing off about the underlying rhythm of the track. So it means that you can relax and listen to the guitar parts, listen to the vocals. The other thing I love about this video, we've got the punk elements in there, but I don't think anybody listening to this would say it's just punk. There are other influences going on. We've got some choppy rhythm in there as well, but the punk attitude is in there because image-wise, we're in totally different places when we look at each band member. We've gone from leather jacket and typically what would be a hard rock look in the 80s, and this is 1980, so it's before all of that took off. And supplying vocals on this particular track, Mick Jones, with the full suit and tie. So we've got that approach to not caring about image, and that's what punk music was all about, but all around in terms of not caring if people liked the music or not. I think a lot of people might have incorrectly come to the conclusion that punk music was about not caring, even to the point of musically not learning to play an instrument properly or not making sure you can sing and all of these different elements that go into being a great live band. Here we've got a great example with The Clash showing you that they have spent a lot of time practicing and honing their craft live in order to get a really solid live performance. And that's the great thing about this particular video. We had London Calling in this particular set just before this performance, so I'm going to leave the link to this video in the description below so you guys can check out London Calling as well. And you will notice tiny mistakes, even some lyrical inaccuracies as well, but that's the whole point of playing live. And these guys, when they did play live back in the day, they played locally with the Sex Pistols as well. And when they shared the bill with them, they played with the Sex Pistols, and then they realized they had to get tighter, that they weren't as good as they wanted to be on their instruments and for a live performance playing for an audience. So they spent a month literally giving up everything else in their lives to just hammer away in the studio to make sure they were a tight live band. Instrumentally, we've got a lot going on here as well, because we've got the organ being added for this particular live performance, so a 5-piece setup, which means that if Mick wants to go into a little bit of lead, Joe, strummer, can play rhythm guitar behind that. So the sound is always going to be full, especially with Joe's all-in rhythm that he throws in there. And Joe supplying the vocal on London Calling on the performance before this means that for a set, when you've got another vocalist that you can go to, it's going to give an interesting change for a live performance and a live set that you might be playing through. I want to draw your attention to Topper Headon again, because he's a multi-instrumentalist and has so many different influences, but also Rock the Casbah, one of those tracks that everybody will know, and when the DJ puts it on, it fills the dance floor. Topper was the guy who wrote that track, obviously played percussion on it, but he played all the piano and all of the bass. It is very much his song, and you can hear the groove that is in that track, and that is all from Topper Headon, throwing it all together. So when you've got somebody like him in the band, you've got so many different places you can take the music, and that's certainly something about The Clash. They had the ability to be seen as a punk band, but also have those crossover hits that would connect with the population en masse because of the hooks and because of the musicality and the melody that has been thrown into the songs. I mentioned about them going away for a month and really rehearsing to make sure that they were tighter live, and after that period they played again with the Sex Pistols, and this would have been 1976 around that time, and a particular critic said that they were like a garage band and they should return back to the garage. And this is the attitude of punk, that they don't care and they're just going to continue on playing, and that comment actually inspired Garageland, the track. But anyway, 1976, moving into 1977, it was a really quick turnaround in terms of The Clash playing live locally to then getting signed, and signing a really big deal for the time, because CBS Records signed them for £100,000, which for that time was a massive sum of money. The thing about it is, everybody will know now, especially if you watch this channel, there's no such thing as a cash handout for a record deal. So they were given £100,000, and that wasn't 25 grand each that they could put in their bank accounts. They then had to pay for recording and everything, touring, expenses. It all comes out of that £100,000, and sometimes the recording, the marketing, all of those things cost more than £100,000. So it means that the record label now has to make the money back through sales, so the band don't get paid anything. But that is the standard deal, always has been, always will be. So in 1977 they were signed, but they were paying for everything themselves, and I think publicly some people thought it was selling out because of the summer money involved, but also the Clash being a punk band, and it now seemed like it was about the money, but it wasn't, because they weren't getting paid that money. It's a common misconception that somehow still maintains to this day in people's minds that people just get paid money in the music industry. It doesn't happen. So they released their debut album, The Clash, in 1977 here in the UK, and for a debut album it did pretty well. It got to number 12 in the charts, but CBS Records didn't want to release it in the USA. They thought it was a bit edgy, especially punk music and the attitude that was involved with the whole punk movement. So they resisted that, but ended up releasing it anyway in the future because of the amount of people that were getting their hands on it, importing it from the UK. But it was one of those situations where the record label were doing it the way they wanted to do it, and the band wanted to do it another way. So the single that was released, it was a great indication of this, because it was called Remote Controlled, and the band didn't want this released as a single, but the record label did it anyway. So it inspired the band to write another track called Complete Control, which was almost a protest about how they were being treated at the record label, and that went on to be a massive hit. It got to number 28 in the charts. So they released London Calling in 1979, and that's where this particular track comes from, Train in the Vein. And the interesting thing about this song is that it's not on the album, even though it's on the album, because they were recording it as a standalone song to release as a promotional thing for the NME, as a flexi disc, but that didn't happen for some reason, so they put it on this album even though it wasn't listed, because the printing for the album sleeve had already started, so it was too late to add it to the track listing. So this song that technically didn't exist got to number 23 in the charts, and the album overall got to number 27 in the US charts. So really popular album over in the USA. And just to clear up the release dates, because the first album that The Clash did, which was the self-titled album, wasn't released in the USA. So the first album that was released over in the USA was Give 'Em Enough Rope, and that is seen as the first album over there. But they then released The Clash, the self-titled first album, as the second album in the USA, and then the third album was London Calling, and that was released in 1979 in the UK, and you'll see that it was released in 1980 in the USA, and that is only because in the UK they released it in December, and it was then released over in the USA in January, so it was only a matter of weeks apart, even though when it's written down it looks like it was a year late. In 1980, Sandinista was released, and that got to number 24 in the US charts, and then Combat Rock came out in 1982, and that was a massive hit, and it hit a chord with a lot of people due to the nature of the songs and its inspiration with the Vietnam War and the aftermath of that war, and it got to number 2 here in the UK and number 7 in the USA. So like I said, it connected with a lot of the audience both in the UK and the USA. A couple of tracks from that album that did well were Should I Stay or Should I Go and Rock the Casbah, which I mentioned earlier in this video. This was around the time of MTV as well. We're talking early 80s here. So getting your music on the TV was such a massive part of selling records and albums. And The Clash were one of those bands that, with Rock the Casbah, they had a music video, so they were in heavy rotation on MTV, which certainly helped the cause to sell a lot of albums. Around this time, things weren't going particularly well within the band, and there were a few personnel changes as well. It all came to a head in 1986. That's when they decided to go their separate ways, and Topper at the time was struggling with his own addiction problems as well, and Joe said that he felt like letting somebody else have a go and that they'd run out of ideas. So I think the problem was as well that they'd had such an intense 5 years from bursting onto the scene and having to play so many gigs, touring so much, so they each went in their separate directions. And Joe did contact Mick in order to try and get the band going again, but it didn't come to fruition, and they did work on projects but never got the Clash back together. In 1991, they had a re-release of Should I Stay or Should I Go, and that got to #1 here in the UK, so second time around it was a massive hit for them. In 2003, they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and unfortunately the year before that, Joe Strummer passed away suddenly, and that was from a congenital heart defect, so it was a real shock and nobody expected it. In 2013, the Sound System box set was released, and that included the first 5 albums that had been totally remastered, and it also included bonus footage and all of that kind of stuff. And looking back at the Clash in this particular performance, you can see that there's a fair deal of musicality going on here in order to bring this to the live stage, and the attitude of the whole punk movement is still in there. And I think having different personalities in the band and also different directions was one of the things that would have been difficult to stay together for the long term, because certainly looking at this performance, you can see Mick's influences, his vocal, maybe taking things in a slightly different direction. And Topper, when I mentioned Rock the Casbah, there's so much in there that might not be in other Clash albums that you might have heard before. So they definitely had separate influences, but were certainly a huge name in that punk movement of the mid-70s, late 70s, and they took it through all the way to the early and mid-80s. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!